The evening air in Lagos carried the faint scent of fried plantain from the roadside stalls, mixing with the distant honks of Danfos as the city pulsed with its usual chaos. Inside the Ajayi residence, however, the world felt different, quieter, heavier. The long mahogany dining table stretched like a battlefield waiting for soldiers to take their places. The clink of polished cutlery and the carefully folded napkins spoke of wealth and tradition. I sat at the far end of the table, my heart thumping louder than the ticking of the antique wall clock. My palms were damp, though I kept rubbing them against my lap to disguise it. Across from me sat my wife, Amara, her warm smile a silent shield meant to reassure me. But tonight was no ordinary dinner. Tonight, I was face to face with her father, Chief Bamidele Ajayi, the man who not only controlled his family with an iron fist but also commanded one of Nigeria's most powerful real estate companies. I had been married to Amara for barely 6 months, yet this was the first time I had been invited to what the family called a full house dinner. It wasn't just about food, it was a stage where unspoken judgments were passed and reputations tested. The chief sat at the head of the table, his presence heavy and intimidating. His sharp eyes, hidden beneath silver-framed glasses, studied me the way a hawk sizes up prey. He was a man used to control, used to people proving themselves before him. And I, a young man from a modest background with nothing but my dreams of building a tech startup, had yet to pass his test. The dinner began in polite silence, murmurs about politics, casual mentions of stock market shifts, and laughter at anecdotes that barely concealed an undercurrent of tension. I smiled when appropriate, laughed when everyone else did, and prayed quietly for the evening to pass without incident. But prayers, I would learn, sometimes fall on deaf ears. It was midway through the main course when Chief cleared his throat. The table quieted. His voice carried authority, every syllable measured. So, he began, his eyes fixed squarely on me. "Tell me, Chuka, what do you even bring to this family?" The question was a knife, sharp and deliberate. It wasn't curiosity, it was an attack. Forks froze midway to mouths. Glasses remained untouched. My wife's eyes widened, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for her water. The silence that followed was deafening. "What do you bring to this family?" The words echoed in my head, dragging with them every insecurity I had tried to bury. I thought of my late father, a schoolteacher who worked tirelessly but left little behind. I thought of my mother, who still lived in our modest home in Enugu, praying for me every day. I thought of my struggling tech firm, which was yet to secure serious investors. I had nothing compared to the Ajayi's sprawling empire, their mansions, their luxury cars. I could feel my throat tighten. Every eye around the table was on me, the chief's brothers, Amara's elder cousins, even the house help lingering by the wall. The chief wanted me to squirm, to shrink, to admit my inadequacy before everyone. Before I could answer, Amara spoke, her voice sharp and trembling with anger. "Daddy, that's unfair." "Unfair?" The chief's eyebrow arched. "I am asking a simple question. Marriage is not just about love, Amara. A man must prove his worth. He must contribute, not just take." He turned back to me. "So, Chuka, what do you bring?" My mouth opened, but no words came out. Every sentence that formed in my head felt small, laughable. I wanted to say I brought love, but in this house, love meant nothing without wealth and status. I wanted to say I brought vision, but vision without money was an empty promise. The table waited. And then, just as the chief's lips curled into a smirk, just as I felt myself shrinking into the ground, the shrill sound of his phone shattered the silence. The chief frowned, irritated at the interruption. He disliked being disturbed during dinner. But when he saw the name flashing on the screen, his company's managing director, he answered. "Hello?" His tone was clipped, expectant. The pause that followed stretched long enough for the tension in the room to grow unbearable. Then his face changed. First confusion. Then anger. And finally, disbelief. "What do you mean?" His voice rose, losing its usual calm. "What nonsense are you talking about?" How can that happen? He pushed back his chair violently, standing up as though the news had physically struck him. The rest of us sat frozen, trying to piece together fragments from his end of the conversation. Something had gone terribly wrong. When he finally ended the call, his hands trembled slightly. For the first time since I had met him, Chief Ajayi looked vulnerable. He turned toward the table, his face ashen. "There's been an incident," he said slowly, his voice heavy. "The company is under attack." Gasps filled the room. Amara reached for my hand under the table, her grip tight. "Attack?" her mother whispered. "What kind of attack?" "Cyberattack," he spat, almost choking on the words. "All our files, our financial data, our client records, everything is being held ransom. They want billions to release it." The room erupted into panic. Relatives muttered prayers. Someone cursed under their breath. The chief's brothers demanded details, their voices overlapping. But me? I sat still, my mind racing. A cyber attack. One of the biggest real estate firms in West Africa brought to its knees by hackers. And here I was, a man dismissed moments ago as insignificant, sitting quietly with skills that could, if fate allowed, change everything. I was a software engineer. I knew about ransomware, firewalls, data recovery. I had spent nights hunched over my laptop, learning how systems were breached, how they could be repaired. My startup might not have secured investors yet, but this was my world. As the room descended into chaos, Chief's eyes found mine again, still sharp, but now laced with something else. Desperation. And in that moment, I realized the very question he had thrown at me was about to answer itself. Because maybe, just maybe, I was exactly what this family needed. The dining room no longer felt like a place for food, it was a war zone of panic. The chief paced up and down, muttering to himself, while relatives fired questions he didn't have answers to. The roast chicken on the table had gone cold, the wine untouched, yet no one cared. I sat quietly, my heart thudding in my chest. My wife's hand still gripped mine under the table. Her eyes searched mine as if silently begging me to speak, to do something. Finally, I cleared my throat. The sound was small, but in the chaos, it carried enough weight for everyone to pause and look my way. "Chief," I said carefully, my voice steady though my palms were damp. "I might be able to help." The room froze. For a moment, there was silence, and then laughter, sharp, disbelieving laughter, from one of his elder brothers. "You?" he scoffed. "Do you even understand the scale of this crisis? This is not a laptop virus, young man. Millions, no, billions, are at stake." I felt the sting of his words, but I didn't flinch. I turned my eyes back to the chief. His gaze was calculating, uncertain. "What do you know about this?" he asked finally, his voice clipped. "I'm a software engineer," I said. "My company, small as it is, works on building secure systems for businesses. I've studied cyber attacks like this. I know how they operate, and sometimes there's a way to fight back." The chief's lips pressed into a thin line. His pride was battling his desperation. To him, I was still the son-in-law who didn't deserve his daughter. But his empire was crumbling, and in that moment, he had no one else to turn to. "Fine," he said at last, his tone reluctant. "If you can do anything, anything at all, then show me." The family members murmured in protest. His brothers shook their heads, calling it a risk. But the chief silenced them with a wave of his hand. His eyes remained locked on me. Minutes later, I was seated in his private study, surrounded by mahogany shelves stacked with books and files, the glow of a massive desktop screen casting shadows across the room. The IT director of his company appeared on a video call, his face pale with stress. "We've been locked out of all systems," the director explained, his voice shaky. "The hackers are demanding payment in cryptocurrency within 24 hours. If we don't pay, they'll erase everything." Chief's face was grim. He looked at me. And? I leaned forward, studying the code running across the screen. My pulse raced, but my mind was razor sharp. This isn't just a random attack, I said slowly. Look at their signature. These hackers. I've seen their work before. They leave patterns, mistakes. If I can trace their backdoor, I might be able to shut them out before they wipe the servers. The director blinked. That's risky. One wrong move, and they'll destroy everything faster. I know, I replied. But paying them doesn't guarantee anything either. They could take the money and still erase your data. The chief sat in silence, his eyes boring into me. Then, with a slow nod, he spoke. Do it. And just like that, the tables had turned. A man who, barely an hour ago, questioned my worth now depended on me to save his empire. As I rolled up my sleeves and began typing furiously, the room behind me was silent except for the sound of my fingers striking the keys. The chief stood nearby, arms folded, his pride swallowed for now. Amara lingered at the doorway, her eyes filled with quiet strength. For the first time since marrying into this family, I no longer felt like an outsider. I was no longer the young man with nothing to offer. I was the one thing they couldn't buy. The one thing they desperately needed. The study was suffocatingly silent, broken only by the rapid clatter of my fingers on the keyboard. Lines of code and encrypted strings flashed across the screen like walls I had to break through. Sweat beaded on my forehead, but I didn't dare stop. Every second counted. Behind me, the chief shifted restlessly. I could feel his eyes boring into my back. Hours earlier, he had dismissed me as useless. Now, he hovered like a man clinging to the last branch above a raging river. Any progress? He asked, his voice tight. Almost, I muttered, refusing to look away from the screen. They left a weak spot, they always do. Hackers thrive on fear. But arrogance makes them sloppy. The IT director on the video call leaned forward, whispering prayers under his breath. Amara stepped quietly into the room with a glass of water, setting it beside me without a word. Her presence was a steadying force, her faith in me unshakable even when my own wavered. Then, suddenly, I found it. There! I exclaimed. My fingers flew faster, exploiting the vulnerability. A hidden port they had failed to close. I slipped in, bypassed the encryption, and began redirecting their commands into a dummy server I had quickly created. The hackers must have noticed. Red warning messages flashed on the screen, unauthorized access detected. My heart pounded. They know I'm here, I said, my voice calm despite the storm raging inside me. But it's too late. A final keystroke. The system shuddered, then cleared. The ransom note vanished. Access to the company's main servers flooded back onto the screen. Client files. Financial records. Sensitive data, all safe. We're back online, the IT director cried, his face breaking into relief. I slumped back in the chair, exhaling deeply. My hands trembled, but I forced a steady smile. Your empire is safe, Chief. The silence that followed was different now. Not tense. Not hostile. Heavy, yes, but with awe. The chief stepped closer, his usually commanding voice softer than I had ever heard it. You saved everything. I looked at him, holding his gaze. And that, I said, my voice steady, is what I bring to this family. His eyes flickered, pride, shame, respect, all tangled together. He opened his mouth to speak but closed it again. For a man who always had words, silence was his confession. Amara came to my side, resting her hand on my shoulder. Her eyes glistened with quiet triumph. The rest of the evening blurred. Calls were made, board members reassured, staff celebrated the miracle recovery. But through it all, the chief remained unusually quiet. I caught him looking at me often, as though reevaluating everything he thought he knew. Days later, when the family gathered again, it was the chief himself who raised a toast. His words were short, but heavy with meaning. "To Chuka," he said, lifting his glass. "The man who reminded me that value is not always measured in money or titles, but in what you carry inside." The family clapped. Some reluctantly, others with genuine warmth. But I didn't need their approval. My worth was no longer up for debate. That night, I realized something deeper. In a world obsessed with wealth and status, it is easy to dismiss people who don't fit the mold. But true value isn't always visible at the dinner table. Sometimes, it emerges in the darkest hour, when pride and money are useless, and all that matters is the strength of your mind and heart. The chief had asked me, "What do you even bring to this family?" And though it took a crisis to prove it, the answer was clear. I brought exactly what no one else could. A reminder that dignity, knowledge, and love are worth more than gold.